Hello, thank you for joining us. My name is Chrissie Hodges, and you're listening to Mental Illness Matters Radio, where we take personal stories to change people's opinion and mind and stigma about mental illness. And we also touch on topics that are important for people who live with mental illness and family members and friends and people who are supporters of people with mental illness. And today we're going to talk about shame, which is something no one wants to talk about, but it's a huge topic when it comes to mental illness. Right now, I have Jody Gamel with me. Yay! He's going to introduce himself.
Thanks for having me on today, Chrissy. As you said, my name's Jody Gamel, and my personal diagnosis is bipolar disorder. And I'm very excited to talk about not only the topic of shame, but also the topic of shame associated with mental illness.
And so Jody and I, you may have seen some of our videos before. We have the Jody and Chrissy peer support series that we've done. We've done some videos, we need to do some more, and we've done some great bloopers.
Seems like we have one every time we do a show.
Not on purpose, unfortunately. Anyway, Jody and I both are peer support specialists, which means we used our own lived experience to help support other people who are working toward recovery. I can't speak for Jody, but I have been in recovery for about, I would say full-on recovery for about 4 or 5 years, maybe a little bit longer. And recovery to me definitely looks like ridding myself of the shame and the guilt and the anger and all of the other emotions that are tied to having a mental illness diagnosis. And this topic I was explaining it to someone today this way, Jody, I bet you'll like this, is I was saying, well, we're going to talk about shame, and we're going to talk about how shameful it is to have shame. And so the shame about the shame.
Doubling up on the shame.
I'm going to have shame about my shame for mental illness. So anyway, Jody, how long have you been in recovery, and what does that mean to you?
I've been in recovery since 2012, and it was at a respite center in Georgia that I met some people that were living successfully with a mental health challenge. And I know I've said this before, and you know that sometimes you just need to know that somebody like your age that's a male is, you need that role model to know that it is successful. It's kind of like the 4-minute mile. Nobody can do it until somebody did, and now they do it all the time.
What a great analogy. I just saw something today on TV where there was a 7th grader that did a mile in 5 minutes and 10 seconds. And I was like, oh.
That's awesome.
That was random. So shame. Jody, talk to us about it. What is it about the mental illness diagnosis that comes along? Why do we have to deal with shame with it? You don't see that with physical illness. Tell me a little bit about why that happens, and what's your experience with it?
For me personally, I believe that there's shame associated with it because there's not a test to prove it. If you have a diagnosis of cancer, there's a test that's you can run that proves you have it. And then, I'll speak on bipolar disorder. Some of the symptoms of bipolar disorder is, you can have substance abuse, you can have sexual promiscuity. Those aren't very attractive things to have while you're going through an episode with bipolar disorder. And those things are shameful. And then, the fact that you can't test for bipolar disorder, a lot of people think you're just doing it. That's just something that you're doing personally, and it's not a part of your disorder causing it.
I did a group this week with some individuals who have mental illness on this very topic of shame. And another thing they mentioned, Jody, their biggest thing was when people are diagnosed with major mental illness, one of the first things they think is, well, the media is always portraying us to be these horrible people, and that we're people that can't be trusted. We're people that will make snap bad decisions or could hurt you. So, you know, or we can't be trusted with the decisions that we make. And so generally, the consensus of the group, it revolved around the stigma, of course, which, that word, it just penetrates everything, I feel like, when it comes to mental illness. But what do you think about that?
You know, I think my own personal experience with stigma and shame and fear, like I feel those three things are like so intertwined that it's hard to dive in and say, you know, this is what I'm feeling in an isolated sense. It's like they all go together. They're braided together. I know when I was first diagnosed with bipolar disorder, you know, there was shame associated with, like, personally, like, I can't believe that I'm mentally ill. And then paired with that was the shame that it could cause of my family. I have this wonderful, strong, loving family, but still I was like, you know, they're going to be ashamed that somebody in the family has a mental illness. So, you know, it was more, you know, externally focused. You know, my son is a concern of mine, knowing that his dad has got this awful diagnosis of bipolar disorder. But, you know, until I went into recovery, the fear, guilt, and shame and the stigma was, you know, permeating my life. And now that I'm in recovery, I feel like, you know, I have people come up to me when I do these types of things and just thank me for being vocal about it. You know, I think there's just a whole group of people out there, a large group, that are living with a mental illness, and they're just so ashamed and keep it a secret.
Exactly. And I'm glad you brought up the family thing. You know, I've talked to a lot of people, especially family members, who say things like, I don't think differently about my child because they have a mental illness. So I don't understand why they think that I do, or they have shame about it. And, you know, the only thing that I try to say is, if you haven't walked in someone's shoes who has a mental illness, you don't know how it affects everything. That doesn't mean that the parents or the brother, sister, or whatever is doing anything wrong or saying anything wrong. It just means there's a societal view that if you have a mental illness, yeah, you're the black sheep of the family, right, Jody?
That's right.
I mean, it's you know, well, how did this happen? And I must be the person that is tainting the family name or whatever. I mean, it isn't something that even can be told to you externally by your family. Your family could be supportive as hell, but it's still something inside of you that thinks, oh my God, now I'm the biggest disappointment. The flip side of that is, if I were to get cancer, and I'm not, oh my God, I'm not saying that, Lord, it's easier to have cancer, please. I'm just using it as an example. The shame I would not feel the same kind of shame. And I probably would get a different reaction from everyone. It would be, if I beat it, it would be, oh my God, she's a survivor. Like, look how strong she is. And with the mental illness, it's, oh, thank God that chapter's over. Right?
Yeah, I totally get your point. You know, I think I think for me, it is personal. Like I said earlier, I have this beautiful, loving, strong family, and you know, they're proud of me, and you know they surround me with love. But it was just, you know, shame is personal. You know, it's you know, most of the time, the shame that I experience, it's from me experiencing it from my own personal, you know, experience. It's not anything externally that's put on me. And I'm very fortunate in that. But I think, that shame that you put on yourself is like 10 times worse than any shame that somebody else externally can put on you. And that's something that it takes time to wrap your mind around when you have a mental illness. And it's only until you start living successfully in your recovery, or at least in my experience, it's the only time you can start to deal with it, is when you go, I'm in recovery, and enough of this shame. I'm not going to feel it anymore. And it comes back and rears its ugly head occasionally, but for the most part, a lot of that shame that I had when I was in the midst of my diagnosis without recovery, it's gone for the most part. Because open up and you talk about it, all these people flood into your life that either want to live in recovery or already living in recovery. So it does a ton to help.
So Jody, on that note, kind of along the lines of what you were saying, do you think that shame is a natural phase that people have to go through to work toward recovery?
Absolutely. For me, like, I lived with copious amounts of shame from 2011 to 2012. And, when you think about how precious life is, and for your life to be filled with shame every day for a solid year, that was kind of my stage. From 2007, when I was diagnosed, to 2011 was just kind of living in like denial and, dealing with a lot of other emotions. But the shame for me just really set in at that time, because it kind of coincided at a time when I was laid off from my job, which had absolutely nothing to do with my diagnosis. But, I prided myself on my ability to work hard, and it was like a double whammy. It was like dealing with a mental health diagnosis and a layoff. Like, it was just too much. The shame took hold.
Well, I'm going to tell you what pisses me off.
Let's go there.
I think what pisses me off the most is that this is part of having a mental illness, this shame and this embarrassment and this guilt. And it's not something any of us asks for. And we would, first of all, we would give it back if we could. And second of all, we would never wish it on anyone else. And so I think that's what pisses me off the most, is it has nothing to do with something that we brought on ourselves, which maybe, Jody, that's part of the problem. Maybe people really do think, well, you could control this, or you brought this on yourself. And so that's why I don't know. What do you think?
I just thought of this, I just thought of this while you were talking, and thank you for bringing this thought into my mind. I just wonder, let's pretend that a mental illness is communicable. You could catch OCD or catch bipolar. I think, there might be a mind shift there in people that, that might, it would cause a lot of fear. It was cause a lot of fear, but
that would be worse than the zombie apocalypse.
That's but it's, people bring you soup if you catch a cold. So, I think that might shift people's paradigm of mental illness too. One, if there was a test for it, and two,
Did I lose you? Are you still there?
I'm still here.
Oh, okay. Okay. And so I know that Jody has to get going. He has somewhere to be. And then y'all are just going to be stuck with me until Angie comes on, I think. But, kind of one final thing, Jody, I wanted to address, especially with you, because you and I both work in the field, and we work hands-on with people who are in the phase where they're dealing with the shame, is what can people do when they are saturated with shame and guilt and embarrassment about something that they didn't ask for? You know, what can they do to work through that phase, or to help themselves feel better about it, or just to be easier on themselves?
I'll tell you the answer to that, Chrissy. It's from my own experience. It was the day I started talking about it. You know, I think, you know, the shame was just like, it was completely stored up in my mind. And the day that I freed myself to talk about it, that wiped out most of the shame. It was incredible. So that would be my 2 cents, is to, you know, you've got something that's trapped inside of you. The day you start talking about it and being okay with it, and, you know, living in recovery, that's the key to it. That's the key to it. And
so, Jody, just so I can kind of summarize what you're saying, is this doesn't happen overnight for everybody, but this is a process. I mean, I'm right with you. As soon as I started talking about it and seeing how many other people go through it, that's really, really what pushed me to recovery. So just to summarize, this is something people work on, and it is kind of like a switch. All of a sudden it's, okay, I'm ready to move forward in recovery. Is that what you're saying, Jody?
Absolutely. So, Chrissy, I'm going to run. Thank you for having me on your show.
Jody, thank you so much. Always a pleasure. We'll see you hopefully next week on the show as well.
Sounds good.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.
Hello, Miss Angie.
Hello.
So Angie's probably like running around. Okay, this is what happened. I'm like, Angie, can you come on the show? Like, Kat was sick today, so she couldn't join us. And so I'm calling Angie like, can you come on today and fill in? And I'm like, it'll be 5 o'clock your time. And then I just texted her earlier. I'm like, okay, so in like 25 minutes. And Angie's like, problem. I'm in Central Time Zone, not Eastern. So thank you for being flexible.
Yes, absolutely. I was so excited to come. And then I was planning my day around it. And then I realized we're still an hour from home. And you were like, are you ready? And that's when I realized. But it keeps life exciting. It's all good.
Angie, will you please introduce yourself?
So my name's Angie Alexander. I'm a stay-at-home mother of 5 children, and married for 12 years, and live in the country, kind of an easygoing life. I was diagnosed with OCD in November of 2015, and struggled with it, though, after the birth of my first son. So technically it's coined as postpartum OCD. But anyway, yeah, suffered from intrusive thoughts and anxiety, intense anxiety. Kept having babies, didn't know what was wrong with me. And then finally I was diagnosed in November, and started a support group called Friends with OCD on Facebook. And I also help moderate other groups for mommies with postpartum mood disorders. And so really my goal now is to, while I'm in recovery, still struggle of course, but while I'm in recovery, my goal is to just offer peer support to other mommies, especially who suffer with OCD.
Excellent. So funny story about how Angie and I met. I'm a pretty blunt writer, which I think is good. Some people don't, Angie in particular at first. I wrote a blog, and Angie had quite a reaction to it. And I remember I went into work, I posted my blog, I went into work, and I came out, and it was like 20 comments under the blog. And I was like, whoa, and it had exploded. Like, basically like, we hate this girl, Chrissy. And I looked at Angie's comments, and she was like, I can't believe this. There's no hope. Like, blah, 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 recovery, that, I'll never be in recovery or something. And I wrote her, and I just said, I was like, I'm so sorry. Like, but she had just been diagnosed like a month before. And so it just goes to show that there's so many stages you have to go through in moving toward recovery. But we ended up messaging each other and then became friends over the internet and met for the first time like a month ago. So anyway, Angie, are you there or are you frozen? I see two of you there now. Hello? Hello. Hi, Angie. Oh, look, I see you.
I'm here again. Can you hear me?
So you're in a cafe with maybe not such.
Can you hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
I'm in like close to Alabama border in a little podunk cafe that's like super small town, great little friendly place, but the internet connection is super lame. So yeah.
Is it dial-up?
I have no idea. I think they're still trying to figure out how to use Wi-Fi, and so they're like everybody in the store is back in the back trying to understand how to turn the Wi-Fi on. So I just connected to my phone's Wi-Fi, which, by the way, the battery is at like 20%. So let's just hope we stay connected. It's exciting, right? It keeps life exciting. It's all good.
You know, all we can do is live in uncertainty.
Yeah, you know. I'm like in the cafe, like this like wannabe Starbucks cafe has like a computer room, which I was thankful for, kind of curious, but thankful for. So anyway, so I didn't hear anything you said. You said it was kind of funny how we met and then I lost you.
I told the story about how you hated me and I wrote the blog and you were like, who is this bitch? Basically.
It was great. It was such a good time.
So Angie and I both suffer with the type of OCD called puro, or intrusive thoughts, taboo thoughts. They typically have a sexual nature, a violent nature, blasphemous. It just revolves around all the different things that you don't want to be thinking about all day, and you do. And so we, I think, can both identify with the topic of shame a lot. So I talked with Jody a little bit about what shame meant to us and why it is. I even said, like, why is it that, you know, we experience shame over something that we didn't ask for or we don't want? It's such crap. So what are your thoughts on shame, and where did shame play a role in your diagnosis and moving into recovery?
I think it's so important. I'm so thankful that you do this, that you speak on issues that it's not like super taboo necessarily, but it's just nobody talks about it. Like you kind of hear, like I know in the mommy communities that I'm involved in, everyone's sort of like, oh, just be kind to yourself, show yourself compassion. The problem is we're just all kind of, I think in the mental health community, we all kind of congregate. So like you have OCD and I have OCD, so you and I connect on a deep level, and then I'm connecting with other mommies and other women and, you know, other men too. But there's still, even I find in myself, there's still this sort of stigma. Like even now I'm talking about mental illness and there's like random people in the room, right, that can hear me. And there's still this sort of like, are they going to think I'm weird? You know, like, I don't know what he's going to think. But so the reality is,
You just went away.
so there's this, you know, the stigma. This is hilarious. So the reality is, for me especially, like I think it's about, like, we care about what other people think. I think everybody on some level cares about what other people think. And mental illness on the news is generally associated with negative, right? People who are diagnosed with mental illness do crazy things. Like that's what we all associate it with. So like you were saying on the phone earlier, you were saying how you can get diagnosed with like diabetes or high blood pressure or something like that, and I'll call my mom up and I'll say, hey, the doctor like was questioning my blood sugar levels today. Isn't that lame? Well, that's legit for me because I'm not worried about criticism or condemnation, but all of a sudden somebody gets a mental health diagnosis and it's frightening. It all of a sudden creates an insecurity in you that most people don't even know that they have. So I think when I was first diagnosed in November, I kind of knew something was off. was a relief at first because I had a name for something. There was a name. I could call it something. I could compartmentalize it. So there's like that wave of relief at first. And then as I start exploring how other people feel about it, especially in the religious community, you remember all that I went through. Some people, mental illness doesn't exist. It doesn't even exist. Doesn't even compute in their brain. So not only do I have to process how I feel about my mental illness, but I have to deal with and process how other people view my mental illness. And so for me, it's been hard and challenging to find a place where I feel confident and secure in my own identity. And then in that way, then I can communicate it confidently to other people, regardless of what they believe in their own personal agenda or convictions. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I would say that I was entrenched in we call it the life is limited phase of moving toward recovery. So it's like the impact of illness. So that relief that you felt, a lot of people do feel a brief sense of relief of, oh my God, I can put a name to it. So this isn't my fault. I didn't bring this on myself or something. And I felt that briefly. And then I went directly into the anger and the shame and the guilt, and stayed there for 14 years. I always tell the story of like, I was my best friend, Mike, in Steamboat. I wanted to tell him, I did not tell anybody about what happened to me with the suicide attempt, the OCD, and definitely none of the details. And I had been best friends with Mike for years. And one day we went out and I was like, I'm going to tell him the story. And like, I got all worked up and we're sitting there like having Budweisers and I start like bawling. I didn't even tell him very many details. I'm just like, I attempted suicide and like was crying so hard. And he was like, oh, well, I'm glad that you made it. Do you want another beer?
Wow.
Isn't this huge though? Do you still like me? And he was like, yeah, I always knew you were fucked up or something. But I think it's just like a testament of building something up in our head of, if we tell people, yes, they are going to believe the stereotypes they see on TV. Immediately, when I did the group earlier this week on this topic, one of the guys in the group immediately brought up, well, it's like, all the murder crime shows, it's always going to be.
Yes, exactly.
The schizophrenic that snapped and went on a killing spree. And that's so ridiculous that it wouldn't even be possible if someone, was in their symptoms for them to actually pull something off like that. So I was in that phase for 14 years. 14. And it was, I had to go through it, but God, it was lonely. It was lonely. So
yeah, I remember when I was first diagnosed, I was so excited, but I didn't want to tell my husband because I thought, well, maybe, and I don't even think, especially in regards to OCD, I don't even think it matters what theme you have. I think it all just feels heavy and intense, and I think especially the people that you love the most, for me, were the hardest to tell. Like, they have these expectations of me. Will people still view me as somebody who is sound and dependable and trustworthy? Are people going to want to confide in me and to look up to me? I mentor young girls, and is this going to change that? Are they going to look to me for emotional stability if I'm, diagnosed with a mental illness? And so for me, it's been a journey of self-discovery, I think, without sounding too spiritualistic. It's been more about it's been more about how I view it. And so I think that's helped me communicate it better with more self-compassion. And it helps others because, so for example, talking with you about mental illness, especially in the beginning, I met you like literally a month after I was diagnosed. So it was all very new still. And you were kind of like, oh, you're still accepting this. Okay, you might want to work on that, sister. So you could even recognize it. And I didn't really know what was going on at that point, But your bravery, your courage, your ability to digest and then articulate back to me, this is what's happening, this is the process you're going through, it's all very normal and natural and good and a part of the journey. It's not to be feared, it's not to be judged, it just is what it is, and you accept it. And so for me, your bravery, your courage spilled over onto my experience, and it gave me the confidence to then kind of carry my own illness in a way that was comfortable for me. And so I noticed the more confident I become in my own shoes and my own condition and whatever symptoms I'm experiencing, then it kind of spills over into other people's experience, and then they're able to confidently kind of carry it up, but it still sucks. I mean, it's still, like I said, I've been diagnosed for, almost a year now, and it's still, I'm saying it out loud, and it's still it's just that stigma. I hate it. I want it to be gone, but it's not. And it's probably going to take more generations of confident people to be able to stand up and say, this is a part of life. And honestly, the more I learn about mental illness, the more I realize, everybody's messed up some way or another. I was even asking this super conservative lady who didn't believe in mental illness, and she said, look around this group of people. And we were in church, and we were at potluck. And I looked around at everybody, and she goes, if we had to name, if there was a name for each condition, she goes, everybody in this church would be entitled with something. Everybody would have some sort of a title, because nobody's perfect. We're all struggling somehow, some way. Everybody has their own personal struggle. And I just thought that was funny, even though I do believe in mental illness and she doesn't. I agree with her in that everybody has something, whether or not it has a name: bipolar disorder, ADD, depression, anxiety, whatever it is. I just don't know anybody who's totally got it all together. And somehow being honest about that kind of helps break that stigma, I think. Just being open about not being perfect and not having those expectations. Even if I didn't have a mental illness, that's the way it should be.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think everybody struggles and suffers. I don't think everybody has a diagnosable something. Because a lot of people will say that sometimes. They'll be like, oh, everybody has mental illness. And I'm like, no, they don't. Because
oh, no, yes, right.
In that way, it's also stigmatizing. Like, oh, everyone has one, but honey, you just couldn't handle yours. You know what I mean? Like that.
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
Puts me in that position. I think the thing is that I think you're right. It's generational. But I really want us to get to a point where when people are diagnosed, that they do feel that sense of relief, and they go, okay, what's the next step? And what's the fastest road to recovery? And I don't think that there's enough people out there standing up. And I mean, because Angie, you see it, you work with people in your groups that won't even tell anybody that they have mental illness. They won't even tell their families that they have OCD. They don't want anybody on Facebook to know they're even associated with mental illness. And to me, that is what keeps us in that closet. That's what keeps us stuck in the closet. I'm not blaming the people that have mental illness at all, but I do think that it is going to take us to finally say, hey, you got to come out and start talking about it. Because I didn't know anything about diabetes until I met someone that had diabetes and watched how hard it was. I mean, I seriously thought diabetes, whatever, you just don't eat sugar. That is what I thought, because I am a moron. And then I saw what this dude went through and how painful it was for him and tormenting. And yes, it can result in death if it isn't managed. And that's when I was like, wow. And that changed everything in my mind. The problem is that nobody speaks about mental illness because they're scared they'll be associated with it. Right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. I think ultimately too, it's not, it's all of it. It's acceptance ultimately, but it's acceptance from others and it's acceptance in our own condition. I think for me, it's more about, my husband just bringing me water. For me, it's been, I think it is acceptance, but it's more like somehow it's easier to talk about diabetes, and it's easier to talk about high blood pressure and things like that, because there isn't the stigma that the media portrays in Hollywood, right? Like you said earlier. And it's just the idea of you don't want, you want to get better. Like, how do I communicate it? You want to be something that you're not. And I think, you know, we find it on Facebook all the time, right? People can portray something on Facebook, but they're totally different behind the scenes, right? And so with mental illness, I am something, but I don't want to be that something. So I keep trying to be something else to everybody else, if that makes sense. I think it's just another branch of, we have these expectations that we set for ourselves, and we want to be this kind of put together person that people will think this certain thing about. And mental illness is just another layer of that, like, personal judgment. I don't know if that's not making sense. Yeah, I lost my train of thought when you brought me the water.
Well, one of the reasons why I wanted to do this topic in particular is that I think that, and I said this earlier, and I said it on the phone to you, is that I think people feel shamed about having shame. And I think it goes along the lines with suicide. People, because suicide can be portrayed by people as a selfish act and a weak, or the act of a weak person, which, by the way, is utter bullshit for anybody that says that. You're part of the problem, just so you know. But if, you know, if people believe that others think that if they are suicidal or have suicidal thoughts or attempt or complete suicide, that they are weak or selfish, they are less likely to reach out. They're less likely to talk about it, and they're more likely to feel isolated and alone, which, as we know, makes suicidal thoughts worse. So my comparison is the shame piece. So people, I think, often get hit with so many emotions when they're diagnosed with a mental illness, right? I mean, you're angry, you're relieved sometimes, but then you're sad, and then you're embarrassed, and then you're ashamed. But here's what, this is why I wanted to do this show in particular, because nobody wants to talk about the shame. You feel ashamed about feeling ashamed. It's, if you have a mental illness, all of a sudden you're feeling like you're lesser than. You know, you feel like you're damaged goods. I hear that all the time.
Exactly. Yes, exactly.
The black sheep, you know, all these things. And so people feel shame, but then they feel embarrassed to say, I'm ashamed, because that's just like the suicide thing. They think, well, that must mean that I'm weak, or that must mean, you know, that I don't want people to see that I'm not confident in myself. Despite having this illness, I want to show everybody that I have a normal life to the outside. Yes. When people who are suffering with physical ailment, sometimes they can't do that, and they'll be like, I need to take leave for 4 weeks until this clears up. And everybody's like, let me bring you a casserole. And we, I think, go to the opposite extreme of, let me do everything in the world to try to make myself look like I'm normal and everything's okay. And that's where we lose and drives us farther, like, away from being in recovery. So that's why I wanted to address it, is that I think it's okay to say I'm experiencing shame, and I'm experiencing, because let me tell you something, everybody does. If you say that you don't, I don't know if I believe you. If you have a mental illness, you're going to feel ashamed. And so let's just get it out there. That's part of what comes with the mental illness. So face it head on. Yeah, I feel ashamed. Yeah, I feel embarrassed. It's okay. You're not alone.
Exactly. I think, and I feel like that's why that process for me was so short, because not everybody has a Chrissie in their life that they can turn to and, like, make sense of the mess, right? And so I think for me, just having you there, and there was a couple others, but you primarily, because you had more boldness in just communicating, like, don't waste time with this. Like, it is what it is. Grieve it, own it, and continue to move forward. Help other people overcome stigma. And I think not everybody has that supportive influence in their life, like I did, you know. And I feel like you kind of communicated. You kind of did it alone. You went through all those steps of grieving and mourning and being angry for a really long time. And And not only do we have to go through those steps, but we have to go through still fighting the illness. So it's not just how we feel about the illness, it's still the illness itself. You know, I feel like that's even the hard part, is just still battling that while you're trying to deal with how everyone else feels about it.
Right. You're so right about that. And I think, Angie, thank you for that compliment. That means a lot to me. But I think, you know, I think you're right. I mean, going through that stage for, I mean, seriously, 14 years. And that is not uncommon. Many people suffer for years with these major emotional reactions to mental illness, and they just don't tell anybody because they're too scared. But my point of doing this and, you know, saying how I feel about everything and really not caring, groinal.
You can't help but do it.
I know, but I just think to myself, like, if I had heard somebody just busting out when I was 23, 24 years old, like, I don't even care. This is who I am, and this is what you're about to go through. Like, it would have made things so much better. I would have felt so less alone.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, I think the whole point is that you don't have to feel alone in your shame. And that I think it's, you know, and I, you know, kind of what you were saying earlier is that, you know, I think this is a natural grieving phase to go through. I mean, you have to grieve any illness. You have to, you know, right. But I think us in particular, we have to grieve a lot of us have to grieve who we thought we were going to be. So there's that. And then society puts this label on you of, well, now you have a mental illness, and people will quote this in the mental health field. So now you have to modify your goals because you're not going to have the life that you once thought that you were going to have.
Exactly.
And I mean, what? That's such bullshit. Like, I would not have this wonderful life that I have right now, you know, if it weren't for my illness. And so, I mean, I consider myself lucky. It's not like, but I mean, I don't know where I would have been without it. I don't know who to be without my OCD. I mean,
well, and I think the other side of that is like I had to grieve the idea of the person I wanted to be, the kind of mother, the kind of wife, the kind of friend, the kind of daughter. Like, I want to be the kind of person who, well, I did anyways. I wanted to be the kind of person who just was easygoing, which could just like one of those moms who could like let their kids go in the yard and play and not worry endlessly about what could happen, and visualizing my car running head on into another one, or, you know, all the anxieties that I feel like we carry around, especially OCD sufferers. I didn't want to be that kind of person. I wanted to be somebody whose knee-jerk reaction was to be chill about things, you know, to just be easygoing in general. I wanted that to be my nature, and I hoped for years and years that eventually, somehow, I could cultivate that in my life. So since being diagnosed, I can do things to change my behavior, which in turn changes some of the chemical balance in my brain, right? So behavior has an impact on how our brains work. So I can do things to change my behavior that does manufacture better feelings, better responses. But essentially, I am just generally a more sensitive person. That's not going to change. So I had to grieve the loss of that, like the loss of like not being like my best friend who is totally chill about everything, like everything. And I hear that a lot from other people. Like, I wish I was like that. And it's normally in response to somebody being just so laid back about things. So for me, and from what I've heard from others, that's the biggest thing, is like, I'll never be that mom who's super chill about stuff. I'll never be the wife who doesn't worry. I'll never be the friend who's not constantly thinking about the worst case scenarios and is she mad or did I say the wrong thing, or analyzing. Like, that's just who I am. That's how I'm made up. So hopefully I grow and continue to learn and process those things. But ultimately I had to come to a place where it was okay to be that. Like what you're saying, like there was so much shame. I had to just be able to process that and accept it and say, okay, this isn't like, so I'm not like in love with the idea that I'm going to be this kind of person, but I grow into it. And like you said, like you love your life. You love how it's worked out. You love the journey that maybe you didn't love getting here. You didn't enjoy all the steps it took to get here, but you know, it's like working out. It's painful. It sucks. Nobody loves it. Right. but it's like squats. Who loves that? Or plank. Do a plank. Oh, you love the way it rocks your body, but you don't love the way it feels while it's happening, right? So it's the same thing. Like, I don't love the fact that I suffer the ways that I do, but I do love the results that it's produced in my life, my friendships, the ability to minister to other people who have the illness that I have. Yeah, and just acceptance. It's just wild acceptance. Just accept who you are. Accept what's happened in your life. You didn't ask for it. I didn't ask for OCD. I didn't sign up for mental illness. It's not my decision. It's not my choice. It's not because I'm weak. It's not because I just don't wake up and make the choice or just stop thinking about it. Oh, that drives me nuts. It's not a decision I'm making on a day-to-day basis. It's in me. It's who I am. It's a part of me. And somehow, some way, I have to own that in whatever capacity I can. And shame and guilt and self-judgment, it disrupts that process.
Mm-hmm. And that doesn't mean you probably don't have days where it is like that. And so, I just want to make that clear that, once you reach recovery or once you reach a point where you don't feel ashamed anymore, that doesn't mean you're not going to have moments or you're not going to have days. But Angie,
I was just telling somebody last night, we were talking about something, and my girlfriend and I were texting, and she was saying how she was like, my mental illness is so exhausting that I just want to go to sleep and not wake up for days. Like, she just wants to lay in her bed and not deal with anything, not make choices, so she's not confronted with it. And even though she's like, oh, so it must be so nice for you. And I'm like, what? I feel that way. On a weekly basis, that would be nice to just not confront it,
right.
And I'm technically in recovery, right? Like, I go for a long time without any sign of OCD. So, and I know how to confront the thoughts and I know how to process things now, but it doesn't mean I don't struggle. So like you said, I know people who have been in recovery for 20 years, and it's still that constant just reminding yourself, this is the journey we're on and it's okay. And yeah, it's fine.
Yeah. So we have about 10 more minutes, and there's one thing I really want us both to address. People may watch this and they may think, oh, look, that's all great for y'all because you have people in your life that accept it, but I don't have anyone in my life that will accept it. Now, this is a true statement for a lot of people who have families that don't want to accept mental illness, who aren't going to support that, who are going to say horrible things to you. That may be like, oh, just get over it, or just go for a run, or you're just weak. Reality for a lot of people. And I have to see it in my work a lot. That we're in 2016 and this is still going on. However, if you are thinking that, well, it's great for y'all and y'all, but you had the support. Here's the thing. I didn't necessarily have that kind of support. I mean, I did from a couple people for sure in the early stages of the journey. But what are some resources and things that people can do to find that support outside of maybe a negative support system?
Yeah, that's perfect. I think that's a great question. I think, so the first place I went obviously was Google, because I'm already there because I have OCD, and that's the top notch thing to do when you're obsessing, right, is to Google. So I think, I'm not condoning that, by the way, it's not.
Biggest compulsion ever.
It doesn't lead to good places, but so basically I think Facebook groups are great. I think some of them are way whacked out. I don't think every Facebook group that's for OCD is okay. I'm not condoning. Yes, without mentioning names, I don't condone all the groups that are out there, but I do think there are really great ones, and I think there are great people in all the groups. I have been in many of them, and so that's a thing. So support groups, even if you can find them in person. I know the IOCDF website has some resources on there for local support groups, for online support groups. So I think that's probably the first thing if you don't have anybody in person. I was lucky enough that I did have you. I found you, but through the Facebook groups. I think, so especially just, the Facebook groups and looking for online support groups. I know there's email lists that are private that have like specialists or whatever. But ultimately, I think for me, I did have you, but you were really the only one until, I mean, it took a really long time for anybody to accept it. And even still in my life from day to day, my husband's the only one that's really acknowledged that I have an actual legitimate mental illness. So I don't have anybody else in person and physically that I can touch and see who accepts it. So I get all of my I get my courage and my, I'm shored up by the people who are online. So that's the first thing I could think of. What are your thoughts?
Well, I would say whatever mental illness you may be diagnosed with, to Google or find an international organization that supports that. So, the International OCD Foundation, I'm sure there's a conference for anxiety and depression. I'm sure that there's some sort of organization for bipolar or schizophrenia, things like that. Find that first and go from there. My suggestion would be to go find memoirs, find books that people have written about their life, working through what they've been through toward recovery, because there is something about reading someone's story that you will be able to identify with, even if you don't have their diagnosis, you'll be able to identify with what they've been through, especially when it comes to stigma. And that in itself helps you feel less alone. I think the whole thing about shame is, I always say, like the Brené Brown quote, like, shame can't live in the light. And so the more that you expose yourself to people who are open about it, not everybody has the courage to stand up and say, I have bipolar disorder, or I have this, I have depression, I have anxiety. Not everybody has that courage or needs to. We're not promoting become a public speaker and start blasting it out to the world that you have an illness. That may not be in the cards for you. However, you can find people that you can talk to about it. There's so much relief in finding someone that can say, I know what it feels like, or you're not alone, or me too. That's Jody, who was just on there. That's his big thing, is the me too statement is so huge. It really does free up the shame. When you're diagnosed with a mental illness, the first thing you're going to think is, oh my God, I'm alone in this.
Yes.
Nobody understands. Nobody will get it. My symptoms are different than everybody else's. Let me tell you something, they aren't. And I mean, if you want to feel unique, you can go ahead and feel unique, but you're not. We're all in this together, and it isn't you against the world. We have to do it together. And so you can find people out there. If you need to keep it quiet, if you need to be silent about your disorder, then do that. Because you don't want to tell the wrong people before you're ready. I always tell people that. Don't tell the wrong people before you're ready.
Yeah, that's right.
And unfortunately, that's where we're at now. In 20 years from now, it may be completely different. But if you aren't ready, I hate to say it this way, but I'm going to. If you're not ready to deal with negative consequences from someone, don't tell them. Because you never know how people are going to react to your illness. So when you're ready and you're confident enough, scream it to the heavens. That's what I'm saying, but don't do it before then. What do you think, Angie?
Yeah, no, that's perfect. I love that. Didn't you just write something, I'm pretty sure it was you, about peer support and how there's something so huge. I just saw it, I think, recently on your page. There's something so huge about personal experience. And when you said to me, everyone thinks that they're unique. That was so funny when you said that. Everyone thinks they're unique. Everyone thinks, oh, well, you might have the same thing. You might have OCD, but mine is so different, and I'm so alone in all of my symptoms. You're not. You're totally not. And you want to be, I think, at first. You want to be unique at first, But then you realize, like, wow, people have thought the same thoughts. People have responded the same way. And the more I mingle, the more I meet people, and I see, like, wow, everybody is like the same. There's the same undercurrent. And the more people I meet, the more I realize that, and it's so comforting to me. And I'm not craving that camaraderie anymore. But when I was, it was huge, and I really needed it, and it was there. And so when I when I put myself out there and expose myself, I've never regretted to this day, I've never regretted being honest about my illness. I have regretted not opening up about it at certain points, but I've never regretted opening up about it, even when I got some kickback that was negative. I've always been glad that I did when it was time.
Right. And that's a personal journey for everyone. Jody and I were talking about the different stages you have to go through, and shame is a big one. So if you're in that phase right now, if you're feeling a lot of shame, if you're feeling a lot of embarrassment and guilt, it's okay. It's a natural phase. So know that it's not going to last forever, but a lot of that depends on you. And you know, a lot of times we have to get comfortable in our emotions. I got comfortable in anger for about 14 years, and it was pretty awesome. You know, I wouldn't take it back, I guess. I can apparently have anger issues, but that's just where I needed to be to move forward in my recovery. So where you are today is where you need to be. But where you can get, Angie says, what Angie just said, you know, I meet all these people and I realize we really are all the same. That doesn't mean your symptoms are going to be the same or the intensity all the time or whatever. However, if you know that we all experience the same things, that also means that we can all experience recovery. And never forget that. The end goal is recovery, and every single person can get there. A lot of that depends on who you're surrounding yourself with when it comes to illness. Don't waste time on people that aren't taking you serious and that aren't really thinking about the end goal of living successfully with your mental illness. You're wasting your time with people who say that you can't do it and that you're weak and everything else. Those people, no, don't listen to them. It's not true. They just don't understand it. And that's probably not their fault either. That's the media's fault.
That's right.
Surround yourself with people who know that it is possible to be in recovery. What do you think, Angie?
Oh, perfect. You always have the right thing to say. I absolutely 100% agree.
Well, we got to wrap up. It's right around 4 o'clock. So Angie, take us out with some final words.
So I think I just wanted to say chime in on the last thing you said. You said it's not other people's fault. I think sometimes we can get so caught up in what people think and how they respond to us. Something that I've learned through this is to just be compassionate with myself first and then with others. So a lot of my family members don't agree. You know, we left an entire church because I felt misunderstood and I felt like they didn't accept that. But I stayed for a long time because I didn't want it to be just that. I wanted to show people grace and compassion, and I wanted to be that person that I desired other people to be for me. And so it's not fair if I'm in a place where I need people to understand me, but I'm not able to offer understanding in return. So I just think it's important to understand that other people are in their own journeys, whether or not they're struggling with mental illness or not, and they're not always going to respond the way you need them to, and that's okay, because ultimately that doesn't matter for you as a person. You don't have to depend on them and their response to grow personally as an individual. So it's important to just recognize that and try not to internalize that, to internalize other people's response to your mental illness and to your recovery. I think that's important. And I just think it's important to be forgiving of yourself. You know, we offer people encouragement, especially me. I spend all day, every day, pretty much just offering encouragement to my kids, my husband, to the people that I meet who are struggling. But I always fall short of offering it to myself. I always fall short of forgiving myself and being compassionate to myself. And all of a sudden I'll pay attention to what I'm telling myself, and I'm being so discouraging and so negative. And I think I just really want to encourage you who are listening. I think it's important to be gentle with yourself. You are going through a lot. And Chrissy and I understand that. And we're also still going through our own thing. And I don't think you're ever going to attain that perfect state that you want, and that's okay. It's just important to be gentle with the journey, be gentle with yourself, and just what's happening at every stage, and be okay with that.
Awesome. Thank you. And I'll just I'll just close with 10 years ago, I never would have believed that it would be possible for me to say that I do not have shame about my mental illness, my suicide attempt, my hospitalization, any of that. I never thought that was possible. And so it is possible for anybody to obtain recovery and to be proud of who you are with a mental illness. There is no where you stop and mental illness begins. There is no where the mental illness stops and you begin. It is all one journey, but that doesn't mean that's who you are. So hope you can keep that in mind as you work toward recovery. For my listeners, this show is completely listener supported. If you would like to be a contributor, you can contribute as little as $1 per show. It keeps it going, and it keeps the content coming and being able to bring in interesting topics and people who can help you along in your recovery. So if you want to go to www.patreon, patreon.com/the stigma of mental illness radio. You can find out a little bit more about me, about the show, and there you can pledge as little as $1 or anything you want per show, and you get charged once a month. This content will not be available to anyone until next week, except for my Patreon users. So you'll be able to view this or share it with your friends, colleagues, anything in a week from now, unless you're a Patreon of the show, and then you'll be able to have the content this week. Thank you so much for coming on, Angie. You rock. Love you. I hope to have you on again. I'm
absolutely
so
thank you.
I think you should do all of the shows from that cafe.
I'm sure some of these boys learned a thing or two about mental illness, so it's all good.
Kat, if you are listening, I hope you feel better. We'll see you next week. And big thanks to peer supporter Jody Gamel for coming on earlier today and lending his expertise on the topic as well. Thank you for listening. I hope you have a wonderful week. You've been listening to Mental Illness Matters Radio, where we are changing the way people view mental illness, one personal story at a time. Have a wonderful day.